And I'd like to welcome back Julie Maris. She is a professor in our department, the Department of Ophthalmology. She is an expert in nutrition, and some of you have heard her this morning, but she will discuss this afternoon the nutrition and the role of nutrition in diabetic eye disease. Thanks, Julie.
I, with my research team, have been researching the role of food and supplements in various age-related eye diseases over the last 25 years, and some of those have involved diabetic eye diseases. And so I'd like to share with you what I've learned from those studies, and also what I can share with you in looking at the broad base of scientific knowledge that relate to diabetic eye disease, as well as how having diabetes has affected some of the measurements and some of the other studies that we have done. The research, when I discuss our research, I'm speaking on behalf of a large team of investigators. Not only our research team here, but also ophthalmologists from 3 institutions led by Dr. Blody, who we just heard from, as well as vision researchers, epidemiologists, and nutritional sciences. And particularly, a lot of the studies I'll talk about today were conducted by Dr. Millen when she was a graduate student here 10 years ago, and now she's gone off to another university and is now continuing work in diet and diabetic eye disease. So when we think about diabetic eye disease, most often we're thinking about retinopathy, which you've heard about, but also there are other eye conditions that are more common in people with diabetes, such as cataract, particularly cortical, the kind that develop off to the sides of our M&M-shaped lens. Those don't interfere with vision quite as much as some of the other types of cataracts. And people with diabetes are at higher risk than the general population for other age-related eye diseases, such as nuclear cataract, which develops in the center of the lens and is more often the reason we have to have cataracts extracted. New research is suggesting if we have diabetes, we have higher risk for glaucoma as well as for AMD. And so what I'm going to talk about applies conveniently to all of these situations. The general take-home messages are going to be diets that lower the risk for all of these situations. I've only got time for an overview. There are handouts at the Ophthalmology and Visual Science booth that have a lot more details, and you can also visit our website. There are a lot less data on diets that lower risk for diabetic retinopathy per se, and the studies are hard to understand. One of the reasons is, in population-based studies, we depend on the fact that when we're asking people about their diet or measuring a nutrient in their blood, we assume it's been that way for 5-10 years. But when we have diabetes, we have made changes in medications and diet so that we aren't stable. So it makes it a little harder to interpret studies of diabetic retinopathy. But there is a huge body of scientific evidence, including trials that have well established that controlling blood glucose, controlling blood pressure, lowers the risk for getting diabetic retinopathy. And there's also some evidence that improving blood lipid profiles lowers the risk for diabetic retinopathy. And we have another large body of scientific evidence that has proven there are dietary means to lower blood glucose, blood pressure, and blood lipids, as well as physical activity approaches that can address each of these. Supplements have been suggested by some people to lower risk for diabetic retinopathy. We'll talk about this to some extent, and this is less well studied than supplements for cataract and macular degeneration. The diets that are generally recommended by dietitians and physicians for diabetes are really usually just the best eating plan for almost everybody. And this includes foods that are rich in nutrients and plant foods, an abundance of vegetables, fruits, and whole grains, moderate amounts, matched with our level of physical activity. Regularly spaced meal times, and consider possibly as part of the meal after meal strolls, because we know if we walk after a meal, like Italians who take a stroll after dinner, that it opens our muscles. Our muscles open the lock, and glucose enter more quickly and get out of our blood. So the spikes that we get after a meal in our blood glucose will be more moderate if we add a stroll after our meals. And so, what is a healthy diet? Well, many diet plans exist. There is the U.S. Dietary Guideline Program, the My Pyramid meal plan, which is also rich in fruits and vegetables and whole grains, minimum of refined sugars and refined breads, and has also daily sources of protein, and includes a wide variety. It's a flexible diet with many possibilities. Also, Mediterranean diets are often considered a healthy diet. These are the diets that are to some extent mimicked the diet found on people in Crete, who were found to be very long-lived and have lower rates of cardiovascular disease. And very similar to the My Pyramid plan, abundant fruits and vegetables, but unlike that, there's a bigger focus on fish, not so much of a push for lowering fat, but more eating healthy fats from olive oils and nuts. And also physical activity is a part of that diet. Now, I talked about blood pressure increasing the risk for diabetic retinopathy, and if we moderate blood pressure, we can reduce that risk. And so now I'm going to talk about the #1 clinical trial proven way to lower blood pressure. I heard this talked about on the campus of UW by Marcia Angel, who was the past editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, a prestigious medical journal. And she said this to a room full of physicians. And so she said, what is the #1 way, most reliable and effective way to lower blood pressure? They're thinking, is it the drug I use? And this is what she said. Diet. Clinical trials have shown that a diet called the DASH diet, or the dietary approach to stopping hypertension diet, has been shown to be effective in lowering blood pressure. Now, what is it? It looks pretty much like the other diet patterns that we saw on the other slide. That is, it's abundant in fruits and vegetables. Well, this is a flexible diet plan like the others, and it is just a little bit different in that instead of the grains being the foundation, it is the fruits and vegetables that are a foundation of this diet. So a little less emphasis on grains, a little more emphasis on fruits and vegetables. They emphasize the importance of low-fat dairy, and instead of high red meat diet, instead focusing on fish and poultry. And in this way, it's lower in saturated fat. And it also, like the other plans, has a small amount of refined sugars and sweets. And this is the same plan, just presented kind of on a plate, so you can see the proportions of different kinds of foods in the diet, with here about 2/3 of the diet being filled with plant foods, about 1/3 filled with sources of protein, not just red meat, a variety of proteins, and as well as natural foods that are high in fat, like olives. The DASH diet, different from the other diet, is also low in sodium. And where do you think we get the most sodium? Is it from our salt shaker? Well, actually, we get most of our salt from foods we eat in restaurants, from snack foods, and from processed foods. So it encourages not eating these foods. eating less of them anyway, and eating more of other foods that are naturally low in sodium. Fruits and vegetables are naturally low in sodium. Beans, which are an alternative to eating meat in your diet, are lower than meat. Beef is high in sodium. Beans are not. And also nuts the same way. So what about salt? Well, we can lower the sodium content, of course, if we don't add salt. And we can concentrate on eating foods that have their own natural flavor. It's close enough in time to ripe tomato season that I can remember how good a tomato tastes, even before you add salt. We all have habits, and I had the habit of always putting salt on a tomato, but I noticed this summer after I pulled a tomato from my garden and ate it, I thought, oh, I forgot to add salt. But really, I thought, wait a minute, it tastes really good without salt. So we don't need probably to use as much salt as we want. But actually, added salt only adds about 6% of the salt of the total sodium in our diet. And if you add the salt less in cooking and more right before you eat it, the salt on the food can be detected by your tongue much more easily for a smaller amount. Also, herbs. Herbs are a wonderful way to add flavor without too much added salt. Now I'd like to change to another aspect of diet that might help us if we have diabetes. Not necessarily lower the risk for diabetic retinopathy. This hasn't been studied too well with regard to that. But it has to do with a pigment that kale accumulates and that trees accumulate. It's a yellow pigment that you can only see when the chlorophyll recedes from the leaves in the fall, as it's doing right now, or when you boil the kale and you look into the water and you see that it's yellow. And that yellow pigment is in our eyes as well. Now, why is this relevant to people with diabetes? I'll explain that in the next few slides. So those pigments are called lutein, and its sister compound zeaxanthin. And some of you might have also noticed that there is also another supplement called mesozeaxanthin, which is made from lutein. It's another structural isomer of zeaxanthin that your body makes from lutein. And they accumulate really all over the eye. So at the back of the eye is the highest concentration of lutein and zeaxanthin. And this slide is of a monkey retina at the back of the eye, the macula, where we see fine detail. And you can see that yellow pigment, which accumulates there if you eat it in your diet. But it's also in other areas of the eye, such as the lens. What's it doing there? Well, it absorbs blue light. And you can see in this photograph with blue light that the yellow pigment is no longer visible because it has absorbed the light. And this happens in the lens as well. You can't see, lenses aren't generally yellow except as we get older for reasons other than lutein, they can turn yellow. But there is lutein, and in cultured lens cells, lutein prevents damage due to even ultraviolet light, even though it's the blue light. It's a different wavelength of light that it absorbs. So it's doing it by a different mechanism, perhaps by the fact that it can be an antioxidant. So lutein can absorb 40 to 90% of the visible light in the macula, in the back of the eye. In the back of the eye and other places throughout the eye, it can also quench free radicals, act as an antioxidant, and lower inflammation. And also, a very exciting area recently is that lutein can actually help us see better. Hunters have known this for a long time. They've worn these yellow glasses so that they can see in the better in the distance, but we didn't have good research. Research is getting better and better. Many studies now are suggesting that having high levels of macular pigment or enhancing our macular pigment increases our ability to see contrasts, to recover from bright lights, such as if you're driving and you see lights shining from an oncoming car, to see in glare conditions. And also some exciting data suggesting that lutein in the eye and even in the brain in higher levels may help us to process visual information more quickly. Now, why is this important to people with diabetes? Well, we've learned something about how we can accumulate macular pigment in these studies where we measure macular pigment using this very simple, non-invasive technique. And I'd like to also say that we're enrolling for a study that we're planning. So if you're interested in participating in a study that involves the measurement of macular pigment, there is a sign-up sheet by the Ophthalmology and Visual Sciences booth. Right now, it doesn't matter if you have diabetes or not. Our priority for enrolling will be people who have a parent with macular degeneration. But what did we learn using this? Well, we did this in about 2,000 women, and we found that people who had diabetes had lower macular pigment at all levels of dietary intake. Why is this? And this has been a curiosity we've been trying to understand. We've gotten a few more clues as we've looked at genes that also tend to be related to the metabolic milieu that's in our body when we have diabetes. And our hunch right now is if we have diabetes, our metabolic system is altered such that it might be more difficult to absorb lutein from our diet, to carry it in our bloods. It usually is on the good cholesterol molecule, yes, that molecule. And if we don't have a lot of the good cholesterol, for example, it doesn't get carried around to places like our eyes. And it may also influence the distribution, the metabolic situation in the retina. So you may need more lutein in your diet to get similar levels of benefit if you have diabetes. How do you enhance levels? Which vary quite a bit from person to person. Eat dark leafy greens, which are the richest source. Also diets rich in fruits and vegetables. Eggs are a very absorbable source. That color that they have is from lutein and zeaxanthin. Also, we know that adding some fat helps absorption. There have been studies done, if you have a big salad and you have fat-free dressing, you do not absorb as much lutein and beta-carotene and other things if you don't have fat. But if you add avocado or oils, you can absorb the fat more. Our studies also suggest that having high levels of fish or the omega-3 fatty acids might also enhance the ability to accumulate lutein, and we're still trying to figure out why. You can get supplements of lutein, zeaxanthin, and sometimes mesozeaxanthin, but we know so little about what the right dose is. If you want to target the amount in foods, which is safe when we really don't have a lot of information, it's about 10 milligrams if you're eating a really high leafy green diet. And be careful to avoid more than 20 milligrams because we really don't know if that's safe over the long term. And we do know that having beta-carotene over 20 milligrams for a long time has increased lung cancer risk in some studies. Now, I think when people think of diabetic retinopathy, the research is most suggestive that antioxidants could be helpful because high blood sugar is known to increase oxidative stress. And so we've done studies on this, and we've looked at if people take high levels of antioxidants in pills, do they have less retinopathy, as animal studies suggest? And actually, one of our very large studies found yes. If people who took antioxidants, usually vitamin C, vitamin E, and beta-carotene for long periods of time, tended to have less retinopathy, but other studies didn't find the same result. It could just be something else that the people who were taking those vitamin pills were doing that protected them against. So I think it's really too early to conclude that taking antioxidants will slow diabetic retinopathy. But antioxidants in foods is entirely safe and come with all kinds of benefits. Not only the antioxidants that are in those pills, but there are so many other compounds in foods which are also antioxidants, also that have anti-inflammatory effects in the same foods. Those tend to be foods which are high in fiber, which we know helps moderate blood sugar spikes. And also, plant foods that are high in antioxidants are also good food for healthy gut bacteria, which we're just starting to understand. But there's some very interesting things happening with regard to diabetes and weight control, that the healthier gut bacteria can actually help us maintain an appropriate weight. We don't know how it happens, but feeding the healthy, we work to figure that out, feeding the healthy bacteria with high fiber, high fruit and vegetable diets might be one way to lower diabetic complications. Vitamin D deserves a mention. People are studying it right now, including Dr. Mill, in terms of possible protection against diabetic retinopathy, because it's known not only to help bone health, but also to have anti-inflammatory effects, and because it protects against the growth of abnormal blood vessels that we've heard so much about today. However, the studies at this point are few and inconclusive, so we really can't say for sure that you should take vitamin D for retinopathy, but we should take it for our bones and our general health. We should get enough in our diet. How do we get it? Go outside for about 15 to 30 minutes. 10% of our skin exposed should probably be enough. Now, beginning in October through to March, we need to do more because the sun is at too low of an angle to have enough UV light to get it. So get vitamin D from natural sources, sardines and other cold water fish, egg yolks, some mushrooms, fortified milks, cereals, orange juices are other good ways to get vitamin D. And if you don't do any of those things, maybe you should take a supplement, about 600 to 2,000 IU if you're not in the winter or if you're not getting outside in the summer. Physical activity delivers oxygen, which could be important to the retina, could be important to limiting the growth of abnormal blood vessels. It also lowers blood pressure, oxidative stress, and as we've talked about, lowers blood sugar spikes after meals. And activity outside, as we said, provides the sunshine vitamin and also a trigger to our retinal cells to get a good night's sleep. If we don't get a good night's sleep, we have a lot of oxidative stress, which is already high in those of us that have diabetes. And exciting research, I think, is that skin exposure to light makes a chemical that sends a message to the pancreas and to the muscle, which improves their sensitivity to insulin. Very exciting, very interesting to wonder why that is. And Aldo Leopold reminded us that a walk in nature never fails to deliver more than we expect. So the bottom line in trying to preserve eye health, and if you have diabetes, is to enjoy foods, mostly plants. This is really the prescription for lowering risk for many chronic diseases. If you have diabetes, consider the DASH diet. There are many books out there on the DASH diet. And because it seems like people with diabetes have lower levels of lutein, leafy greens might be particularly important. Move and enjoy the outdoors, get adequate vitamin D, and pass it on to other generations. Thanks.